President Trump wading into the fighting between Israel and Iran with strikes on Tehran's nuclear facilities has, of course, raised the stakes of the conflict even further. So Keir Starmer says the UK had no involvement in the strikes, but that Iran is a grave threat to international security.
Well, if that's the case, should the UK be offering more help to the United States and join an allied force against Iran? Well, joining us now, defence researcher Robert Clark, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, along with Liberal Democrat MP Mike Martin, who also served multiple tours in Afghanistan, in which case it may be surprising to people to know that you hold completely opposing views on what should happen next. So, Robert Clark, you served with the Royal Anglian and were deployed in Iraq as well as Afghanistan, and a lot of people think, well, this has echoes of Iraq, and look how that ended. But actually, you think we should get more involved at this stage. Why?
It's not necessarily a case of we should get more involved. I think there's a legal and moral basis to be more involved, should particularly America and potentially Israel request that assistance, which so far neither have. That may change.
Yeah.
In terms of why we should, I think there's the legal context is really important. We've heard very little confirmation from the government so far as to the legality, the nature of it. But regards to the comparisons with Iraq, I think it's actually a particularly clumsy, if understandable, comparison to make. The intelligence picture, for example, 22 years ago is completely different to how it is now. The famous 45-minute warning that was regularly echoed by the government of the day, there wasn't much context behind it. There wasn't much probing. People now are understandably a lot more interested in knowing why it's the case, why there's an imperative to do so, because of things like Iraq and Afghanistan. And what I would say to that is it's completely separate to Iraq 22 years ago.
You think there is legitimate evidence and reason
Very much so.
to attack Iran, obliterate, as Donald Trump says, their nuclear facilities because they're on the verge of, or may even have got so far as to create a bomb?
Absolutely.
So on this legal fight, it's reported the government's Attorney General, the top lawyer, Richard Hermer, says it wouldn't be legal to act. The Conservative Shadow Attorney General, David Wolfson, has written publicly that there would be a legal basis for Britain to join the Americans if we chose to do so, to defend ourselves and to defend Israel. And you think we should... who's right?
Well, first of all, the point of clarity, Lord Hermer didn't say it wasn't legal. He said he had doubts as the legality. We're still waiting to hear more about that. In terms of who's right, it's the international law is one of those things where it's almost in the eye of the beholder. It's very vague. It's open to interpretation. What I would argue quite strongly is under the United Nations Charter, Article 51, the inherent right to self-defence by any state, Israel have exercised that quite relatively easily. Now, it also gives legitimacy to an allied nation to help defend a nation under attack, or imminent attack, or close attack. And obviously, in this case, it's Israel. So
That's
I think
the key point, though, Rob, right?
Sure.
This imminent threat, imminent attack, there isn't evidence for that. And the US, with its own intelligence assessments, just a few months ago, they've now changed their tune post the US attacks. But the actual US assessment, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence in the US, said that Iran wasn't planning an attack.
Well, like you said,
So
she's changed her opinion already.
Exactly. She's changed her opinion after the Americans have
Or
launched
she's had
an
her
attack.
opinion changed.
She's had her opinion changed. And you know, you were in government when we had this problem of intelligence that then gets steered into the right place by the political direction, and that creates all sorts of problems. And you say that Iraq is a clumsy analogy. It's not. You know, I hate to say this as a Lib Dem, but we warned against that war. We warned that it had an illegal basis and it wasn't going to end well. And I'm very sorry to say that we were right.
And
this
can
is
I just
exactly
ask
the
you
same.
both? So you both served in Afghanistan. Would you say that was in any way a success?
No, it was a disaster.
Would you say that was any?
I would say tactically it was a success, strategically it was a failure.
OK, and Iraq, how would you assess that?
I would say that's a bit more difficult, but roughly the same. Tactically it was a success, but strategically probably even worse.
There's a difference between Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Afghanistan had 2 UN Security Council resolutions. It was a NATO force. There were tens and tens and tens and tens of nations that backed that, right? That had a solid legal basis. Iraq did not have that solid legal basis.
But in both cases, we left countries in a mess.
Syria, Libya, you know.
But that's no reason now to not be involved in Iran. Like I said, the situation is very, very different.
Yeah.
Mike
do
did mention...
you see the differences, Mike? I mean, we don't have a great history, but is Iran a different
No.
Case.
There's two things on which you want to judge this. One is the legal basis, right? And there is no imminent threat, and that's what the US intelligence has told us. There's no imminent threat.
Which it's now backtracked on.
Israel, which is now backed on post facto, Israel launched basically what is considered an illegal attack, and the British government's own legal advice seems to say that as well. And then there's the question of, is it strategically sensible? And what we've seen just last night, less than 24 hours after the attack, J.D. Vance, the US president, saying, oh, actually, sorry, we didn't get the uranium, we don't know where it is. So not only is it, it's a key demonstration of American power, which is great, but it doesn't actually achieve what it sets out to do.
When you say not under imminent attack, at what point should a country that another country has said should be wiped off the face of the earth, at what point should it defend itself? If that has been an existential threat, if you say, well, you don't then take action until they're about to launch the nuclear weapon.
Well, I'll tell you
is
what.
that not the point at which it's too
late? Imminent isn't several months, and that's probably what we're looking at.
Would you agree that imminent would be 2 to 3 days?
Imminent would be 2 to 3 days, but we're not
so
2 to 3...
there's an assessment, so there is an independent assessment of the IAEA's most recent May quarterly assessment of Iran's uranium enrichment that puts the Fordo alone, which is one of the more minor of the three main ones that got hit on Saturday night, that put the breakout time of Fordo to 2 to 3 days if Iran developed it that quick for one nuclear weapon. And 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks for 9 to 10 nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Developing nuclear weapons is not that difficult. The US in the 1940s did it in 4 years. The Soviet Union did it in the 1950s in a year. Iran has been doing it for 30 years. If they wanted nuclear weapons, they would have nuclear weapons.
They want nuclear weapons, but they consistently get backtracked by the Israeli intelligence and Mossad, destabilising and destroying.
Do you know what it is that backtracks them? It's negotiations, right? And under
so
the
you agree
previous,
we should have military action?
Negotiations. Under the previous Conservative government, we had an agreement called the JCPOA that
which was a failure.
Bear with me. It was not a failure. It limited uranium enrichment.
Iran broke the terms of the JCPOA within the first 4 weeks of it being enacted.
Do you feel, just finally, do you feel safer this morning or in more danger?
I feel less safe, and the reason for that is because the Middle East is less stable than it was.
I feel in the long term it's increasingly more stable and safer.
Thank you both very much indeed. We asked you if the conflict continues, should Britain assist Trump? And less than a quarter of you said yes, we should. 77% said no. Doesn't seem to be from that polling that there is overwhelming support for us getting more involved.
I think if you poll Donald Trump's own supporters as to whether Donald Trump should be involved in a war outside the American borders, rather a lot of them would say no to that as well.
Thank you both very much indeed. Keep sending your thoughts in on that.